Welcome back. Last night I had a chance to break 1300 rapid, but I failed in this position right here. I'm hopefully going to show that to you fairly quickly in a way that we will all understand. Okay. This arose from a Caro-Kann defense in which my opponent played what's called the hillbilly attack. That's a variation of the Caro-Kann in which the light squared bishop comes out pretty quickly for my opponent. But in this position right here is where I blundered away my advantage and then basically had no chance of recovery, so I resigned. Right here, if you analyze with your eyes, not with the engine, and just look at the position, it fairly quickly becomes obvious, I think, to most people what should be done, and that is to move the e-pawn, e6. That defends the center pawn, that allows the dark squared bishop to get out, either all the way out there or possibly even to right here behind that pawn so that I can castle. I don't need this pawn here to defend the knight because the knight is already defended by the other knight because I have very intelligently moved it to d7. But what I did instead was I blundered. But I'm just going to go back to the beginning. For those of you unfamiliar with the Caro-Kann defense, it is playing c6 as a response to e4 in order to defend the d5 square for a later d5 push. And when I say I've been studying this opening, I use that in a very relative term to mean I'm trying to learn the basic moves. But here, normally what white plays is this. Plays d4, so when I play d5, they already have two center pawns. They can choose then to take or to advance. But the hillbilly attack is when the bishop comes out to c4 immediately. And it's supposedly not a very good way for white to respond to the Caro-Kann. Here I go ahead and play d5, and then my d5 pawn is not only defended by the c6 pawn that I've already played, but it's also defended from behind by the queen. And I've run into this before, so I knew that. And I know that if they take here, I take back, and then that bishop has to back away. In fact, right now, for white, this is the only move that isn't a mistake. My opponent took, and of course, now my only move that's not a mistake is this. I think possibly that's why some players with the white pieces use the hillbilly attack, is because there are only moves. And if at any point one player or the other messes up, then it's a problem. And here now they actually have a couple of choices. They can move to b5 to check, in which case I will obviously block with either the knight or the bishop, or they can drop it back to b3. They can even take it back here, which the engine says is their best move. I think bringing it back here gets out of the way of these pawns. It allows the knight to develop on their next turn, and then they can castle. But my opponent played what most of my opponents usually play, which is to keep the bishop here pointed at my king side. That way, I guess if this pawn ever moves and I end up castling, they're going to have a ready-to-go attack with that bishop. And I can't get to it immediately. Here I have a couple of different moves. One is getting this bishop out, and I have an advantage now. I can develop this knight. I can develop this knight. I chose to start with the knight to f6. There's not that much difference in those three moves because my opponent's attack has stalled temporarily. And again, here, because their attack is basically over, they're no longer forcing like only good moves. So they have several choices as well. They played one of them, and I was still, I guess, a little worried about this bishop getting onto the other diagonal and checking, and I thought if I play a6 now and they ever do that, I can block with b5. I really don't like to block those checks with my knight, although it turns out to not be that bad. The pinned knight always gets me in trouble down the road for some reason, and I don't like to block those checks with the bishop because then we trade those off immediately, and I don't like to simplify too early if I can help it. But anyway, so I played a6, which wasn't my best move, but the idea again was to prevent this check on that diagonal. And now we're taken back to equality. If I had played, after they played d4, if I had played bishop to g4 or bishop to g4 or f5, or if I had gotten this knight out, I would have continued to have an advantage. But this takes away what little advantage I have. But my opponent made the mistake here. It's in many of these positions, it's at least an inaccuracy to try to pin a knight that isn't pinnable yet. This knight, there's nothing to pin it to. The only thing that does is prevent me from and it doesn't even prevent it, it just discourages me from playing e6 immediately. Again, I have bishop to g4. I can play the knight to e4 to immediately attack their bishop, and I can still get this knight out. I did not make any of those moves, but I decided I did want to move this pawn eventually, so I played knight to d7, so the knights defend each other. That turned out to be an inaccuracy on my part, but none of these moves most of these moves aren't mistakes. They're normal developing moves. Here I decided to kick out the bishop. It drops back, and now I'm supposed to play e6, because remember, that was the whole idea of putting this knight here to defend that knight, was so I can play e6 and then later move out my queen. But my second best move is to play queen to a5. I found that thinking that this knight, it was attacking this pawn, and now it can't because it's pinned to the king. Obviously, I think e6 would have accomplished that purpose as well, keeping the knight from taking the pawn. My opponent played that, I guess hoping to move this knight at some point and hit my queen. And here is where the position that I opened the video with, where I blundered. My thinking was I could attack the queen, forcing it to move, but attack the knight at the same time. Yeah, that loses all my advantage. And again, what I should have played here is simply e6. I would have maintained my advantage. But this not only loses my advantage, but gives my opponent a crushing attack. Because now, when they take this, they're attacking my undefended queen and defending their own queen from there. I don't know why, but for some reason, I thought when I moved the knight there that if they took it, I would get their queen. Their king would have to take back, and then I would get their knight too. But that's not what happened. Then my opponent saw it, and as soon as they did, I realized, wait, I'm just down a piece. I just lost a knight. So that's how my attempt to break 1300 went. One blunder. Neither my opponent or I were technically counted with any inaccuracies in the game review. Just that one blunder. So thank you for watching. We're going to try again in the next few days, and maybe we can get back up there. See you next time.